Okay.
My views on MenAreTrash. I think that it's an important act of resistance. I don't want to undermine any effort to resist current norms and standards and problematic aspects of society. But I have nothing against the movement. It's just that I just have questions on myself as someone who has used that phrase MenAreTrash in situations where I found myself being confronted with violence from people who I believe are men, which sort of leads me to my first question, is that maybe one of the discomforts I have about the movement is that it's largely reliant on the assumption that everyone who inflicts violence on you, who looks a certain way, is a man. So I'm very wary of the binarist approach that has been that the lens that the movement has been taking with respect to that, because in very implicit ways it somewhat negates the fact that other people, other bodies are also capable of inflicting violence on another person. Not to dismiss the current conversation that we're having about people who believe to be men, but the mere fact that we have to make an assumption before we reach a conclusion or make a deduction about it is something that somewhat comforts me. But also I somewhat do see the need for it at this point in time. We haven't on a larger scale as a people, as a continent, we haven't interrogated what comes with accepting or investing or holding on to or somewhat using these identities that we currently possess, such as man, woman, with respect to race and sexuality as well, when we haven't interrogated the effects of colonialism and how we function with respect to what I just said. So that's how I feel about it. And also maybe the racialized aspect is when a white woman looks at the hashtag MenAreTrash, who's the first image that comes into her mind? It's a black man, right? And there's been there's a big history when it comes to white victimhood and black men and swart gevaar that I think that sometimes comes at play when this in this rhetoric or when people are talking about MenAreTrash. But in all of this, I still do think that we do need some sort of mechanism to hold people to account for the violence that they inflict on other people. Because even in the MenAreTrash conversations, we're looking at it in a very cisgendered way of a man inflicting violence on a woman, normally in the context of a heteronormative relationship. So what happens to queer people, transgender people, or just other bodies, disabled people, other bodies who experience violence at the hands of cis men, and once maybe we've clearly defined who we're talking about when we say men, talking about cisgendered men as a total, then I think that we can start making those kinds of statements and all of that. But I think that I don't know, I have many feelings about this topic. Not to say that I don't support it, I just think that we must always have a deep historical context when we say that, because I still do think that to a certain extent it can be used as a tool to raise awareness about an issue, can be used as a tool of resistance and many other things. But once the deeper, maybe historical contextual based questions are answered, we can move forward in that fashion. So what was the second question?
The second one was, I think you touched on it, but it says, what do you think is the imagination of the MenAreTrash movement?
I wouldn't know. I mean, I'm fairly active on Twitter, and I've seen a lot of the conversations around MenAreTrash, and it gets really awkward because we're having a conversation about the violence of cisgendered men in society as a whole, and even in that there are distinctions that are somewhat racialized and who fell victim to settler colonialism and who did. So there's a certain measurement of this manhood thing, because when we say men, we're talking about black men, we're talking about white men, or we're talking about men from the global south, or we're talking about, so it's just maybe too much of a generalization for me to be too comfortable with the movement. But from the conversations that I've been seeing on Twitter, a lot of it's that rhetoric of the way that they go about calling out these people who are trash is they play into the very thing that causes them, or that made them to be conditioned to be trash, if that makes sense. So things like playing on someone's masculinity, like an extreme example would be like, you're not a man if you beat a woman, or that's just an extreme example, but obviously those kinds of things manifest themselves very differently, more ambiguously, depending on the context that we are in. But I mean, a lot of the times that's the kind of conversations that I see happening. Also, the thing of one has to be like, also there's not much conversation, maybe I'm just not in those spaces, but there's not much conversation about how men are trash to themselves, cis men are trash to cis men, if they deviate from the ideas around manhood by like a fraction or so in that, and even if they're on par, but like I'm just saying that, like when we have to, things get very, very sticky once we have to categorize and compartmentalize violence, because then we're going to do that thing of what violence what violence has a higher degree than the other, and that gets very like, it's that in itself is violent, to have someone trivialize an experience that you have just because of X, Y, and Z, or you didn't, your respective identities didn't fit into the right categories and all of that. Obviously this is all within the context of black people. What white people do, I don't think I don't know. I don't care to know about what they're going through, but that's just my sentiments about that. And also like the phrase "MenAreTrash" implies like victimhood, right? So then my question becomes, who's feeling the brunt? Who's the pictured victim in the situation? And if we like look at it maybe at a broad context, one would say women, like the critique that I just previously made. But I mean, even if you look at like what kind of women are worthy of that kind of outrage and our inconsistencies in reacting to violence, even there you can see something funny is happening. Because I mean, like if you look at the recent tragic death of Karabo looked a very specific way, and you can't deny that. And not to say that she contributed to like what happened to her, but it is to say that us as the observers, as the people who are meant to be up in arms, who are meant to be reacting and all of that, we were very inconsistent in our reactions to the specific death. Because if you're being very honest, like femme bodies, women, a lot of people, transgender women, like a lot of people have been dying like at very alarming rates for the past few years, but because someone of Garabo's sort of stature passed away, now the issue somewhat resurfaces, and it seems like it's a new one, and it's an ancient old sort of situation that plays out all the time in this country, unfortunately. So like once we like, I don't know, not try to think about this question of violence in a very binarist like approach of it manifesting itself in heteronormative cisgendered situations that are always like linked to some sort of romantic connection or things like that, then maybe I think that there's a lot to build on. Not to say that what's happening now is completely unreal. And also I'm not like the knower of everything, but these are just like feelings that I've been somewhat harboring because they may come across as controversial at times not. But yeah, I think that would be a conversation that I'd like to have or be in the space of more frequently. That's the other question.
What do you think is the influence of pop culture and or art and mainstream media on the perpetuation of trash behavior?
That's a very big question. On trash behavior, as in context with relation to MenAreTrash.
Yes.
Ooh, the media is the devil. It's a white devil. It's very lit because it's that thing. It goes back to that thing of whose victimhood is worth mass outrage. Who got the most media coverage? What stories is the media most likely going to like gravitate towards? It's very, very. It's yo man. It's lit. I don't even know how to like configure my thoughts about this question because it's something that I've been grappling with
a lot, especially in relation to like the politics of desire and who deserves violence and who doesn't. When it comes to the cisgendered women community, in that there'd be outrage about, I don't know, for example, Jay-Z cheating on Beyonce. People would pass comments like, wow, but it's Beyonce. Which somewhat implies that there's someone who's not Beyonce who is deserving that kind of treatment, right? And that's sort of the rhetoric that's spun in the media that, like, okay, maybe outside of the fact, maybe like, let me bring it to like where we are, even in your squad of friends or circles, if like a woman friend of yours gets cheated on who you deem desirable in any way, you'd be like up in arms, as in, wow, this person clearly doesn't know what they have, and all of that, which also does that thing of like implying that someone who's not your friend who's deserving of that kind of treatment, which is very, very extremely problematic. And because like social media is like a chat room, a big ass multi-mix, like all of these opinions just like it feels like they're just like amplified because they're there on the timeline, people affirming each other in their very problematic opinions about very serious topics and all of that. But yeah, I wouldn't know much about what's happening in the media side of things, but I know, like, with respect to what I see on social media, I can say that I'm concerned about what's happening and what people are thinking about what's happening with respect to violence in this country, what's been happening with respect to violence. And I don't know, somewhat to a certain extent, it's easy to be complicit to like the perpetuation of that kind of narrative. So I don't know, I think the solution to everything is maybe introspection. I don't know. And even the rhetoric of what if it was your family member, what if it was your mother, what if it was your sister, whatever the case may be, still relies on the principle that had it been someone who was not your sister or not your mother or not your aunt, it would have been acceptable. So there's that thing of making violent acts against certain bodies like more palatable or like that, and that makes me feel very, very, very uncomfortable.